Hey guys, this is DJ. We are coming at you with something I haven't done in a little while. It's a Starcraft 2 replay, and we're actually going to be doing it a little bit differently than last time. Anyone who saw the projects last time realizes I just kind of watched a game and didn't really commentate on anything or really give any real insight or look at anything strategy-wise. This time we're going to be trying to do that a little bit more. Now, this is a game between Despa, the Zerg player in the southwest corner, and Real Epic in the upper right corner, as Terran, obviously. And I'm actually going to be going a little bit fast here, just trying to get through the early stages of the game. Nothing too fancy. Zerg going for the expansion, of course. Terran's smacking down a barracks and getting his orbital command a little bit earlier than I usually like. No, I'm sorry, I was looking at workers instead of supply. That was my own stupidity. Despa actually steals this gas here. Doesn't affect the Terran at all. Not actually sure why he put it down, because he doesn't even have the first gas on his main. So by the time that he needs that second gas, he's going to have enough Marines to destroy it. Real Epic actually going for a little bit of a hunker down strategy here, popping down supply depots and bunker toward the front of his base here, putting his Marines in them, while going for his own natural expansion, of course. Despa actually sending out a few Zerglings here to scout it out. They're going to be easily stopped by the time they get here by these bunkers and the Marines that are inside of them. He actually took some of the Marines out to block up that little hole there, which was kind of smart. Alright, both players sort of gearing up here. We're not seeing too much in production. Real Epic is throwing down a few extra barracks. Now, what I want to note is that he has yet to get any gas. He's actually just now getting the two refineries up, one in his main, one in his expansion. So for the most part, he's just been cranking out Marines one at a time. Somewhat ineffective, going for that fourth barracks right there. But Despa has actually not been producing almost anything. As you can see, he's got about 7 drones coming out here on the natural. But it's just now that he's starting to get enough units to really defend himself. I think if Despa had gone for a somewhat early Marine push, he actually could have inflicted some serious damage and stopped this economy from growing. Alright, Despa finally making a little bit of a push out here with the Zerglings, at least to the Zelnaga watchtower, but Real Epic is building up a serious defense at the front of this base. It would be borderline impossible to build upon, and we're going to start slowing down here, because this is the part of the game I want to start looking at. Despa has thrown down both a Roach Warren, and a Baneling nest, and of course that scan did catch them, so Epic knows exactly what's going on there.
We could use some help here. Oh.
Zerglings did catch a Marine sitting there at the third base. But what I want to note is Real Epic has actually thrown down 3 tech labs. Not a single reactor, still cranking out Marines one at a time here, cranking out Marauders from all 3 of the other barracks. Finally just now getting his factory and starport down. Working on both stim packs and on the concussive shells. What I want to note here is what we're going to see over time, because of these 3 tech labs, is a very heavy Marauder composition, especially compared to most Terran players who go for a heavy Marine Bio-Ball, especially when you consider the possibilities of mutas. Despa making a push out here, and I want to note that while Epic does have some very good vision of just what's going on in this base, he did have enough time to see both the Roach Warren and the Baneling nest. Despa has almost no vision. As far as he knows, this guy has 1 orbital command center, 1 barracks. He did send in a Zergling to scout it out there, so now he does actually know that there are 3 bunkers here. Decides to go ahead with the attack anyway, moving his units into position. Actually going for a bit of a Baneling bust here, getting about 10 of those out. But here's where things kind of start to go poorly for this guy. Poor Despa blocks off his Banelings with his Roaches at first, finally gets him in here to bust up this bunker, but these Marauders are absolutely shredding through everything in his army. The Zerglings were gone in seconds, the few that he had left. The Roaches just take so much damage from the Marauders, dealing 20 damage versus armored, and those Banelings are just completely ineffective at taking out Marauders. Utterly ineffective. And here's something else. I actually want to go back here about 30 seconds to note. Despa was actually sending in more units this entire time, even right here where his army is very clearly losing to this mass of Marines and Marauders, still sending in more and more Zerglings, which might have worked theoretically, but those Marauders are just in such a strong position, and those Zerglings just get decimated the second they come anywhere near him. Finally making a push in, but Real Epic just has so many more units at this point. He just absolutely destroys those Zerglings. And now, Despa has absolutely nothing left to defend his base, except for these 6 Zerglings that he's turning into Banelings, and then a handful more that he's just now getting sent out. Would have had a much stronger defense if he would have left those Zerglings in the base. Granted, Real Epic would have been able to attack with a few more units, but those Zerglings were just so utterly obliterated. Now, here's where things start to go from bad to worse. Sending in 6 Zerglings, 6 Banelings, and absolutely no Marauders lost. Not a single one. Those Banelings are just completely ineffective, and although Banelings are generally a good rule of thumb to counter with when you're playing against Terran who go Bio-Ball, against Marauders they are just absolutely worthless. A complete waste of resources. And he is actually starting to crank out some Roaches and Zerglings to deal with this attack, but is just almost useless by this point. Real Epic is actually sort of multitasking here, sending in 2 medevacs over here to go to the 3rd base. We're going to see that in a little bit. Roach is starting to get out, and they do finally manage to put an end to this offensive, but Real Epic is already building up more units in his main base. Medevacs on their way, Marauders, Marines, already got that Terran infantry weapons level 1 going up. Zerg is finally starting on his own upgrades, but they're just not gonna be anywhere near as fast as the Terran got his up. Terran here going for his 3rd base. Zerg just completed his 3rd, but that drop destroyed the one queen he had out there, and now he's going for the main base. And as you can see, these Roaches are desperately coming in trying to deal with this drop, but these Marauders are in such a good position here. Most of the Roaches couldn't attack at the beginning, and by the time they got all the way moved in, Marauders are just absolutely destroying them. With the first weapons upgrade, it just makes it so much worse. These armored Roaches are just utterly obliterated here. Now he's actually having to pull drones off of the worker line here to deal with this attack. Meanwhile, Real Epic over here is just kind of relaxing with his 4 mules on his expansion. He has so many resources. He is now up to 8 barracks completed. Still getting tech labs. Not 1 reactor in sight. 3 barracks producing Marines 1 at a time, and 5 with tech labs. And his Bio-Ball is just so heavy on Marauders. And this drop does finally start to get shut down with that queen, but there are just so many Marauders, he has to actually pull all his workers away. And they have just effectively shut down this main base. 1-1 finally getting done for the Zerg player here, but it's actually a melee upgrade, yet he continues to produce Roaches. I am absolutely blown away by that. Army supply and worker supply just absolutely, completely out of balance here. As you can see, we're sitting at 136 versus 63, and that number just keeps falling. He puts the drop in at the natural, and the game is over. Now I actually want to pause here for a minute and go over some of the things that I think really he should have looked at in this game. Despa had a few mistakes he made. Number 1, in my opinion, was his composition. His army composition of Banelings and Zerglings was just absolutely terrible for this matchup. By the end of the game, once again, Real Epic had 8 barracks at the last time we checked, and 5 of them had tech labs. Banelings absolutely terrible against Marauders. I cannot stress that enough. And if you run into a group of well-microed Marauders, the odds are just even worse. Roaches also terrible against Marauders. He was actually better off right there toward the end when he started making that 1-1 melee upgrade, but then he continued to produce Roaches, making that melee upgrade absolutely worthless, even if it would have been completed. So we're actually going to take a look at a few videos I shot here in a unit tester just to further demonstrate this point of why you need to be aware of your opponent's army, not just the strategy he's going for. This is just a very simple matchup, 1500 minerals worth of Zerglings versus 1500 minerals worth of Marauders and Marines. A little bit heavier on the Marauders. Now let's see what happens when these Marines and Marauders get attacked by just this wave of Zerglings. Now keep in mind there's absolutely no micro going on here. Those Zerglings not getting even really much of a surround at first. And yet they still come out unbelievably on top. Now this is pre-upgrades. We're just doing this for a basic demonstration of the units. 17 of those Zerglings survived. Now let's look at that with Banelings added into the mix. 1500 minerals again on both sides, 250 gas on each side. So now it's actually a little bit more even in terms of resources spent. You would think that this would be a little bit better matched up. But the second those Marauders get put out in front of those Marines, the ability of the Banelings to inflict any serious damage at all just goes straight to hell. Once again, very little micro here, just basically attack moving both armies at each other. Now those Banelings do roll around and get a little bit of good hit on the Marines, but the Terran still comes out. Keep in mind, this is with more resources spent on the Zerg army, and the Terran absolutely decimated it. 3 Marauders and 2 Marines left alive. Now let's look at a best case scenario for the Zerg player here, where the Terran doesn't manage to get his Marauders out in front. Those Banelings a little bit more effective, actually destroying most of the front waves of the Terran army with those Banelings. But what little is left still managed to inflict significant amounts of damage. 14 Zerglings left, 3 less than if you just had Zerglings, and that is a best case scenario basically. Now let's look at 2,500 minerals. Once again, 2,500 minerals of only Zerglings versus 2,500 minerals of mixed of Marauders and Marines. Now, once again, very little micro. I did try to do a little bit more movement to surround there. But overall, the surround wasn't even completed until right about now, so we're looking at a pretty even situation. And yet, as you can already tell, the Zerglings are absolutely overwhelming this Terran army. The Marauders deal very little damage to light units, such as the Zerglings. And the Zerglings just obliterate the entire army. As you can see, over 20 of them still left alive. Actually, over 25, I believe. And ludicrously outmatched. And even when the Marauders get out in front like this, the difference is almost non-existent when you're using Zerglings that are just Banelings. I did get a bit of a surround there. So once again, the Zerglings just going in absolutely starting to destroy this Terran army. You can see it's a little bit better for the Terran this time, but there are still more than enough Zerglings to just wear away absolutely every part of this army, coming out with about 15 left. Less than if the Marines and Marauders were mixed, but still. Now let's look at it with 2,500 minerals of Zerglings and Banelings. And once again, these Marines are not behind the Marauders. This is absolute best case scenario for the Terran. I mean for the Zerg. And even in the absolute best case scenario, it comes down to just 10 Zerglings. 10 Zerglings left out of a massive army. I mean, that's literally 10% of the resources you had spent, or that you spent on it, being left at the end. Now let's look at somewhat less best case scenario. The Marines, again, aren't being micro here, but they are behind the Marauders. Banelings going in. The Banelings actually got a very lucky hit on some of the Marines, so this could have actually come out a lot better for the Terran, but he still comes out of it with 8 Marines and a Marauder left. Now let's look what happens when the Marines are actually microed a little bit. And this just absolutely destroys them. These Marines coming in, backing away as the Banelings come in, and just starting to destroy everything. Didn't lose a single Marine there. 20 Marines and 1 Marauder left. Absolute victory for the Terran. I mean, that army could still take on several Zerglings or more Banelings. So now, we're going to look at upgraded units. Now this is 1-1 with stim, with Baneling speed, with Zergling speed, with Zergling attack speed. With Marine stim and no micro done on either side, it comes out much worse than it did before even, because that extra stim just absolutely decimates some of the Zerglings and the Banelings. And you can see the Zerglings definitely do have their attack speed there. I just kind of demonstrated that. Now, let's look at what happens with upgrades and with Marines starting out behind the Marauders. Now, the Baneling actually got a very lucky hit and destroyed most of the remaining Marines, but it comes down to 1 Zergling left. Now, we're going to do upgrades with microed Marines. And I'm aware that you could actually micro your Banelings a little bit better to target the Marines, either forcing them to run or to destroy. But basically, for the purpose of this, we're just going with a direct attack. And once again, not a single Marine died. We have 20 Marines left, most still capable of stimming if they get to your base. Now this is if you just have 2,500 minerals of upgraded Zerglings. And as you can see, it's already going so much better than the Baneling attacks. These Marauders have absolutely no way of competing. Even with the entire army stim, there are still so many Zerglings left. This is 12 Speedlings / Cracklings, and those will decimate a worker line. You get those into your base as a Terran, and you're going to be absolutely terrified. So what I really want to drive home here is not that you should absolutely not go for Banelings. I'm not saying that at all. What I am saying is you need to be aware of what your opponent is doing. If your opponent is going for a very heavy Marauder composition, an army consisting of mostly Roaches and Banelings is going to be absolutely shredded when it comes time for combat. Even worse when they have medevacs and stim packs. So if you see a heavy Marauder composition, you need to adapt. You need to go for a lot more Zerglings, or even switch to air. 5 Mutalisks could have destroyed his army once the Banelings came in. Rather than always going for the same strategy because you think you know what your opponent's going to do, you need to start looking at what his army is doing. The Zerg player in that last matchup we just watched actually had plenty of time to sort of redirect his army, produce a few more Speedlings, before the Terran player even got close to his base, but he kept producing Banelings, he kept producing Roaches even though he got the melee attack upgrade. Despa just refused to learn from what happened earlier in the game. As soon as he saw his units losing that battle, and he saw what his units were losing to, he should have adapted his strategy. The lesson I want to give in this video is that you don't just need to know general counters. Knowing that your opponent has 8 barracks and immediately starting to build Banelings doesn't mean you're going to lose the game if it doesn't work. But when you see his army and realize that it is 50 or 75% Marauders, you need to adapt. You need to stop building Roaches, stop building Banelings, get something else. Get something that works. Go for air. Go for Zerglings. Hell, go for something, even Hydras. I would have loved to see even Hydras over all these Roaches taking so much damage from the Marauders and their concussive shells. Alright. That's going to be it for this video, guys, and I hope to see you in future videos. We're going to look at a few more replays and see if we can't pick out a few other strategies. Alright, bye guys.